Morning, everybody. How you doing? All safe in your houses? We're all snuggled here in our little private hidey holes, our little bat caves, our monasteries, our cloisters, our prison cells. However you're thinking about it today, it's always a pleasure and an honor and a joy to be with you here at Friday Reflections here at San Diego Oasis. Welcome especially to all of you outside of the San Diego area. We're getting some viewers from Washington, D.C. and from some other places in the country. No, not the White House. I don't think he's tuned in to Friday Reflections. but it's just really a thrill to kind of look at the data after the gathering and see where everybody's from. I'm not looking at that right now. But if you're new with us today, a special welcome for you also. Thanks for taking a chance on this. We do this every Friday, 30 minutes from 10 to 10:30 West Coast time. And we just set a little pause in our life. You know, Joseph Campbell talks about creating sacred spaces in your life. You might not have a big house, so you can actually have a special room, but maybe it's an hour of the day where, or a half hour in our case, where you kind of pull back from the news of the day and you pull back from your busyness and your career and your work and your to-do list and all the things that normally occupy us and kind of eat our brains. And you take a moment, and I'm not saying it has to be this Friday Reflections. I'm at work right now actually, but somewhere in your life, isn't it important to kind of take a chunk of time or build a little space where you kind of unplug and reset and allow all of your mind body systems to kind of go back to their factory settings. We all have our practices. I know that meditation is particularly potent at helping me do that, come out of the outward turn productive guy mode and just being, instead of a human doing, a human being. And I find that in many religious and sacred traditions, they build that in. They build that in. And I wonder, especially for us secular humanist folks, if we've been careful enough to replicate that necessary self-care of building into your schedule true downtime, where you kind of come away from the screens and simply look at the sky and listen to the wind and maybe read your favorite poem out loud to the trees, or get on the lawn with your dog and let him tell you some stories. Those are the things that I find are necessary now more than ever in this difficult time. So, as I often do with Friday Reflections, I think of maybe a thread or a through line or a theme that we can raise together. And I've been these last few weeks talking about kind of checking back in with everybody on how we're all surviving the pandemic, the stay-at-home order, and frankly, just to be very explicit about it, the gargantuan grief at the literal loss of lives. After the Oklahoma City bombing, after 9/11, our nation set aside, this came from leadership, right? Our nation set aside official times of mourning. And as a professor of religion and mythology, I'm particularly aware of how essential those communal rituals are. And I just notice, and a lot of folks have been commenting on this lately, we haven't done any national mourning. On the TV news, there's the numbers, there's the graphs. But it's almost as if to acknowledge the gargantuan death toll is to acknowledge a mistake. And then in our current leadership climate, that apparently is verboten. And so we just all simply must sit here and eat it instead of come into some kind of communal space. And I'm talking about like an hour on television where we just show all their pictures and let artists sing. That's, we don't need the solution. We need connection. And boy, is that missing around the enormous death toll from COVID-19 without even getting into any of the politics, right? Just on the human existence level. So Rituals matter. And for me, this Friday reflection has come to be a part of my ritual life. And guess what? I don't just think about it on Friday from 10 to 10:30. It's in my head all week long as I'm thinking about and processing my own struggle, my own successes, my own life, my own grief, and I think, maybe we'll talk about that on Friday. Oh, maybe we'll talk about that on Friday. So as I curate these Fridays, I go through a daily sifting process, and I wonder if that is what ritual helps us do. Is that it isn't just that ritual, it's how you know it's coming again on a cyclical circle. Is that a dumb thing to say? A cyclical circle? Hey, it's live TV. What do you want? I don't have a script here, so we'll edit that out later. So there's a circle, and you know you're coming around again to that point. And so even if it's just a momentary ritual, it's really always with you, isn't it? And it gives your life kind of a scaffolding, a sort of a structure, like an architecture. So what I've been thinking about this week is Lord Shiva. Remember him? We talked about him on another day. And I want to think about the Hindu god Shiva in relation to everything that's falling apart right now, everything that we're losing, everything that's changing so fast right under our feet. I've heard this phrase 3 times this week in different Zoom meetings with colleagues at Southwestern College and other folks, that we're building the plane after we took off. It's a really nice metaphor. We took off and we're flying, and now we're building the plane that we're flying in. That's really how it feels. And so I want to think about Shiva and what the deeper meaning in Hinduism is of this god Shiva, and how it kind of helps me navigate the grief and navigate the letting go that is inevitable around us. And this is the key, right? By looking at also what's being born. And that's the title of today's Friday reflection. What's being born? Because it's easy to write a quick list of everything that's dying, all the institutions, all the businesses, the way we do education, the way we do healthcare, the way we do everything, the way we have family. All of the old ways are dissolving. But what is filling in? What is taking shape? That's what Shiva's about too. So Lord Shiva is one of the 3 principal deities in Hinduism. Just to review real quick. There's Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and then Shiva, the destroyer. So the headline title job description for him is the destroyer. He oversees the dissolution of all forms, the coming undone of everything. And that's why he's in a circle of fire here. Let me get him a little closer. A circle of fire, and you see he's dancing. He's dancing. It's hard to see, but he's dancing on a little demon here who represents ignorance and avarice and greed, and so that's being destroyed. And Shiva, like many Hindu gods, doesn't just have 2 arms and 2 legs. He's got 4 arms, and they're kind of waving around. And in one of his upraised hands, he holds a drum with which he's keeping time. And in the other upraised hand, he has a flame. The flames, like the ring of fire around him, the flames that will consume all forms. So on the surface, he's a rather terrifying, fearsome god. But in Hinduism, whether it's the Vedanta tradition or the broader Sanatana Dharma and all the various schools of Hinduism traditions, he's a big deal, this god. And he's understood not just as a destroyer god, but as a god who makes creation possible. And we've thought about this before, those of you that have worked with me in other classes and talks, and it's a cliche, isn't it? When God closes one door, he opens another, that the ends of things are also the beginnings of things. So we all know that, especially from the school of our own experience, that when we went through that difficult divorce 20 years ago and met our second spouse, I'm just making stuff up here, and now we look around at the life that the 2 of us have built together, and we can't imagine our life being any better or any different than it is. And you're kind of like, I guess it was a good thing that my first trial marriage ended. etc. You can go through your own list. That time you got fired from a job. Um, I have friends who lost their who lost their home in a fire. You know, living here in Southern California, we of course have the constant threat of wildfire. And in the Cedar Fire, they lost their home. And is there anything more devastating in the material plane than losing your home? But of course, then as the next couple of years rolled on and the insurance got processed and the contractors were hired and the rebuilding plan was established and the designs came in, and they built the most amazing house. And it's the house they always wanted to live in, not that funky thing that got burned down. So what do you do with that? Do you say, well, it's a good thing their house got burned down? No, that would be weird to say that. It's to acknowledge in a nuanced way that forms arise and forms fade. And in a way, wisdom is to celebrate all of it with a certain sense of detachment. Today's opening day at Southwestern College, where I've been teaching for 30 years. And what that means is some Friday at the end of August, we always get together the Friday before school starts. So classes begin on Monday at my college. So here it is, Friday opening day. I'm in Zoom meetings all day. I was in one this morning. I skipped out so I could be here with you. And as soon as I'm done here, I'm back into Zoom meetings all day with all my colleagues down there. And opening day used to be a chance for us to all literally see each other and hug each other and talk. And there'd be thousands of us packed into big arenas. And it was really kind of a homecoming. But this year, it's all this. It's all the Brady Bunch grid. You know, thousands or hundreds of people in giant Zoom meetings. And getting the work done as best we can. So again, we lost something, but there's a sense in which we've really gained something too. And let me just talk a little bit about my work life. And I know I have a lot of former educators on the webinar with me, and people who work near or around education, and certainly many of us in this Zoom have raised children and had a front row seat on the educational process through the eyes of our own child rearing experience. So all of us, and we were all students so in school, so we all have some window and some stake in this process. So some of you have been watching this closely. You know, there's a lot of revolution happening in education. And enrollment's pretty steady at Southwestern College. We didn't know last April if anybody was going to come to college anymore. You know, is our enrollment going to be cut in half? Are we going to have to cut half our classes? Or, as often happens in community college, when there is dramatic economic downturn like we're in right now, when we're seeing unemployment numbers like we're looking at right now, when unemployment goes up, community college enrollment goes up. A lot of unemployed folks come back to college and pick up some more professional skills or finish that degree or whatever. We've seen none of that. We've seen no diminishment and no increase. Everything's kind of even. So let me also put it this way, that over the summer, a lot of us teacher folks have been training really hard to get better at online education. And I gotta say, ever since we got kicked off campus last March, I have been in closer contact with my colleagues than at any other time in my 30-year career. Teaching's a weird job, at least at the college level. You're kind of in your silo. You walk into your classroom, you teach your stuff, you go back to your office by yourself, and you go to your car and drive home. We'll have the occasional department meetings, the occasional school meetings where I see my dean, but it's almost like you work by yourself. And that's not how it is anymore. I get on Zoom calls and telephone calls with my colleagues all the time. They screen share with me. They show me how they're building their online classes. I show them how I'm building my online classes. Very rarely do we teachers attend each other's classes. We talk about what we're doing, but to be in the room and to be in the lesson, these are amazing things that are happening because we've been forced to move education from a face-to-face medium to a digital medium. And as we're getting better and better in the online space, there are amazing benefits. Let me talk about the student side. And maybe some of you are experiencing this with the Zoom thing. I got an email after my last webinar here from an attendant here at SanDiegoOasis who said, I really prefer these Zoom meetings. I don't have to drive to Grossmont Plaza. I don't have to park. I don't have to walk across the mall. It's much easier, and you're not this tiny guy up on the stage. We're kind of, it's almost like a one-on-one chat, like watching Michelle Obama talk Monday night at the Democratic National Convention, or hearing Barack Obama the other night from Independence Hall in Philadelphia give their convention speeches in their indoor voices. You could hear them breathe. No shouting, no giant hall filled with thousands of people in funny hats. This Democratic National Convention and the Republican one next week are going to be very different political events because of this, and much has been lost. But I got to tell you, as a politics watcher, I thought this Democratic National Convention was kind of awesome. And wasn't the roll call amazing? To see people in Guam and in Rhode Island and in Arizona, and all of those little Zoom snippets where they cast their, this party machinery of like casting delegate votes and stuff. It suddenly became a tour of all the beautiful faces and voices and places of the American diaspora. 50 states and about 7 territories. That's because of this. This is what Shiva did. When Shiva took down our ability to be together physically, he made space for us to build community digitally. And there are benefits. Finally, as I promised, let me get to the student experience. We worried about our students. Are they going to, fall away? But now that I've had my feet and my hands and my head in distance education, as we call it, online education, and as I've trained with a lot of very much more experienced distance educators, I've learned that the research is really clear that DE, or online education, actually, if you do it right, creates deeper, richer, more meaningful, and just more engagement between students. Think about it. I used to go into a room with 45 students and I would give a lecture and try to have a discussion. And you know how it is in class discussion. I'll get 8 or 10 students involved. And the other 30, 35 students or whatever are listening, maybe keyed in. It's always the folks in the back row on their phones, and I have to remind them, can you turn your phone off, please? And so that doesn't happen in DE. What happens is you build these things called discussions, and you give little, you grade them, you give them a few points. They are required to engage with discussions, and that means they're required to talk to each other. They're required to read everybody else's comments about a particularly focused discussion question that I've posed based on a video or on a reading. You scaffold everything together, and students talk to each other more. Students talk to me more. There's opportunity for one-on-one Zoom conferencing. And all the lectures become videotape lectures with captioning underneath. And they can stop the video, they can rewind it, they can take notes on it. Much better than a live lecture that if you're sick that day, you just miss it, right? So I guess what I'm trying to do, I'm hoping I'm not boring you to death talking about my job, but I'm just giving you my little slice of the pie, and I'm thinking about how every other industry, how every other endeavor, how every other human activity has been transformed and reborn and recreated thanks to this dynamic process, which the Hindus personify as this particular guy here, who I often think about. So in the end, Shiva is a creator god as much as he is a destroyer god. By helping old forms dissolve, he makes available the raw materials from which we will build whatever is next. And my connections with my colleagues are better. My connections with my students are better. it's really kind of amazing what is possible. And I don't think we're ever going to get back. Like if the whole pandemic ended and the whole stay-at-home thing ended, and all of a sudden everybody could go back on campus, I have a real strong feeling that more and more of our students are getting used to this. And I'm thinking about next fall of 2021, and moving maybe as many as 20% of our classes from face to face to online. This is so great for working parents with young kids. This is great for deployed military around the world. We have students taking our classes from Iraq. These are opportunities, and remarkable opportunities. So, in a word, Shiva shows us that our weaknesses become our strengths. I guess that's more than a word. In a few words, our weaknesses become our strengths. You know, one of the most riveting moments last night was at the Democratic National Convention. I'm a politics watcher. I watch all of that. I'll watch the RNC next week too. One of the most riveting moments last night for me personally was Braden Harrington. Braden Harrington is a 13-year-old boy with a pretty debilitating stutter. And they gave him a little 5-minute piece last night where he talked about his stutter. And now he wrote to Joe Biden, and Joe Biden, they ended up meeting, and some photos of him and Biden sitting together, and Biden showing him how he overcame his stutter or how he manages his stutter. And it just really struck me, yeah, it's a staged moment. I got some pushback on social media today. That kid was just a prop. Well, I didn't see him as a prop. I was crying watching him because I was a stutterer when I was 13. Watching him try to talk and get stuck on a letter, and just stay there and courageously, knowing he's on international television, to work through that. Because in his words, working with Vice President Biden gave him confidence and courage to kind of just deal with it, just to let it be what it is and keep working anyway. And when Biden was a little boy, when he was in school, and the teacher asked him his name, and he said Joe Biden, and the teacher mocked him, said Joe Biden, and he got up and he ran out of the room and he ran all the way home. And Joe Biden's mom put him in the car, drove him right back to school, and marched into that classroom and told that nun at that Catholic school, if you ever talk to my son like that again, I will drive back here and knock that bonnet off your head. And Joe Biden tells that story because it for him means that, you stand up for yourself, you speak up for what's right, you stand up for kindness. It's a funny thing to say, isn't it? You fight for kindness. You fight for understanding. You push back against mockery. But what I'm thinking about in terms of Shiva today is Braden Harrington's stutter, Joseph Biden's stutter, my stutter when I was a kid. Now look what I do. I talk for a living. It became a strength because as I lived with the mockery and the feelings of being ostracized, of being left out, of being less than, having to live with that kind of darkness, it opened my heart into vulnerability. I began to have more empathy for the suffering of others. And that empathy leads to compassion. That compassion leads to wisdom. And I challenge you to think about your own weakness or woundedness or not enoughness in that same way. That crack is how the light gets in. That hole is the space you need to hold the whole world. Our own suffering makes us available to feel the suffering of others. That's why it's so dangerous to have a narcissistic sociopath in charge of your corporation, your college, or your country, because they're incapable of having that empathy. Other people aren't even real to them. And you and I can reflect on these things at the personal, sort of spiritual, philosophical level, how we called impediments and turn them into superpowers. That's a powerful thing. Michelle Obama's great line that she often uses, that being president doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you are. And I would say that also about our hardships. Our hardships don't reveal, excuse me, let me say that right. Our hardships don't change who we are. They reveal who we are. In those moments of despair and grief, we reach down deep and we find that strength that we would not have otherwise seen or known how to wield, hopefully in the service of alleviating the suffering of others. That is the gift of Shiva, the gift of destruction, the gift of loss. I'm going to drop a couple of passages from you here as we move into our last few minutes from the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu in the Stephen Mitchell translation, the great Chinese book of wisdom from 25 centuries ago. I found some passages this morning that seem to me to be connected to what we're reflecting about today, how loss becomes fuel for rebirth. And let me ask you, as I read this, what other scripture does this remind you of? Chapter 29 from the Tao Te Ching. Do you want to improve the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. It can't be improved. If you tamper with it, you'll ruin it. If you treat it like an object, you'll lose it. There is a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being in motion, a time for being at rest, a time for being vigorous, a time for being exhausted, a time for being safe, a time for being in danger. The master, the wise woman, the wise man sees things as they are without trying to control them. She lets them go their own way and resides at the center of the circle. So in the Chinese Wisdom tradition of Taoism, we hear, it's uncanny, isn't it? A reflection of those famous lines in the Hebrew scripture Ecclesiastes that Pete Seeger turned into this great song. To everything, turn, turn, turn. Yeah, there's a time for this, a time for that, right? It's the same exact impulse to watch the rising and falling of fortune, to recognize that in times of great turmoil, there is great opportunity. That I've never seen the kind of social and political engagement that I've seen in these last 4 years. Things are being destroyed right now, and things are being born. And to kind of just recognize that all of that is happening, and to be okay with the rising and falling of the tide, and to recognize that we participate in it. One other passage here, this is chapter 36 from the Tao Te Ching. If you want to shrink something, you must first allow it to expand. If you want to get rid of something, you must first allow it to flourish. If you want to take something new, you must first allow it to be given. This is called the subtle perception of the way things are. The soft overcomes the hard. The slow overcomes the fast. Let your workings remain a mystery. Just show people the results. So those two passages from the Tao Te Ching really seem to remind me of the kind of place that we find our place in now. One last section here, verse 41. The path into the light seems dark. The path forward seems to go back. The direct path seems long. True power seems weak. Braden Harrington. True purity seems tarnished. True steadfastness seems changeable. True clarity seems obscure. The greatest art seems unsophisticated. The greatest love seems indifferent. The greatest wisdom seems childish. The Tao is nowhere to be found, yet it nourishes and completes all things. After Charlottesville, when white neo-Nazis marched on the street with tiki torches chanting "Jews will not replace us," the infamous mantra that we haven't heard since the 30s in Germany. When that became possible in America for Nazis to openly march on the street and to, with their cars, run down and murder peaceful protesters, when that kind of horror comes out of the cracks and shadows in which it normally hides, that is when the path into the light seems dark and the path forward seems to go back. But Shiva reminds us that in these times of great loss and hurt and grief and destruction, something is being born. And to save some of our bandwidth for that, to save some of our attention for that, to save some of our prayers and our intentions for that, to look at the darkness, to say, yes, there are shadows, but to also acknowledge that shadows mean the presence of light. And it's dangerous to talk about these things without descending into platitudes and cliches. And I often go back to the classic texts because they do it without platitudes and cliches. But they remind me of the perennial wisdom of that exact perspective, to step into that longer view and to realize that. So as I begin to close with you, let me plug a couple of things coming up. First of all, my own webinar this coming Tuesday. I know many of you are already registered, but if you're not, think about it. I'm doing a webinar, a brand new webinar for me on this coming Tuesday. What month is it? August 25th, from 10 to 11:30, one of my 90-minute webinars called Unpacking Racism Through Dialogue. So me and my African-American friend, Charles Jarvis, just a black and a white guy, are going to sort of swap stories about where we grew up, how we understand America, how racism and anti-racism hits us. And he's a really wonderful, optimistic, loving guy. And I think you're going to come away from this webinar not depressed with a bunch of, horrible data, but uplifted about what is still possible. That Seamus Heaney line that Vice President Biden always quotes, where hope and history meet. What if America could be that place where hope and history meet? I'm taking that energy into this webinar. I'm not a Pollyanna. I don't think we can just snap out of it and fix everything because we read a book or whatever or went to a webinar. But damn it, inaction is not enough. Just being aware of it is not enough. And I find when I reach out to my African-American friends and colleagues and cohorts in this anti-racism sphere especially, I come away from those conversations just moved to my bones and awakened to the possibility that it doesn't have to be this way. Why should it be this way? There's nothing inevitable about the way things are. Things are the way they are because they were built this way by powerful institutions and people. And we have allowed institutions to exist that self-replicate those same cycles over and over. Read Robin DiAngelo on that. White supremacy is a self-replicating system. Doing nothing ensures its stability. And so getting in good trouble and being willing to become a disruptor of that is of keen interest to me. And so I'm curious about exploring that and a dozen other topics, ideas, and questions. One last plug and I'll let you go. Look, SanDiegoOasis, you know it, you love it, it's an amazing thing. They are planning the best ever tech fair. They do tech fairs every year. This year they're going to do it in tech. And it's going to be 4 days from October 20th to the 23rd, Tuesday, 3 days. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I can count. That's 4 days. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, starting October 20th. So find that, register for that on the Oasis website. Tons and tons of corporate and educational and community resources are going to come in, offer you stuff, help you get what you need out of this technology that we're all in now. Help give birth to what is being born. instead of sitting back and kind of, I don't like it, I don't want to do it, it's hard. Instead of bring curiosity to it. Go, huh? I got some of it figured out. I wonder if I added this tool or that tool or this tool, I could do even more. I could connect with my grandkids and my kids even better. My social community, my faith family. Start connecting better with your synagogue, with your church, with your sangha, with your mosque. So let's use these tools to enrich our lives, not to diminish our lives. And with that, I will wrap up and thank you from the bottom of my heart again for joining me for Friday Reflections. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll see you on the other side.